We begin with the Biden administration announcing that 4 families separated at the Mexico border during the Trump presidency will be reunited in the United States this week. President Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office vowing to reunite the thousands of children separated from their parents under Trump administration policies. Our chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega has more on that. She's been following this from the beginning. And Cecilia, tell me a little bit about what the administration is doing now to follow through on this promise that Biden made on his first day in office. And what do we know about these families that are being reunited immediately?
Yeah, Diane, well, we don't know a lot about these families. As you mentioned, there are 4 of them. We know that at least of this 4, there are 2 mothers, one from Mexico, one from Honduras. We're talking about kids who were really young at the time. Right now, they're between 3 and 12 to 15 years old. This all happened back in 2017, 2018. This was, of course, that family, you just said it, family separations policy. This was a policy by the Trump administration. They would hope to separate families and use that as a deterrent for people coming across the border, that perhaps families would see this awful separation situation, these awful images of parents being separated from their kids, and then not come without documentation and wait their turn to come. But what was happening was that these families were being separated. Kids would stay here in the United States. Parents were sent back to mostly Central America without their children. And here we are, fast forward 3-4 years later, and they are still, this administration, the White House, the government is still trying to track down so many of these parents that were moved across the border because the Trump administration, the Biden administration, says didn't keep clean records on them. So now it's like finding a needle in a haystack trying to find these families. It's just an awful situation.
So, Cecilia, this is clearly good news for these families. But members of the Biden administration task force on this have said already, by its count, more than 1,000 families remain separated. 4, that's not very many, given that scale of disruption. Why only 4, and what is coming next?
Well, it really speaks to how difficult this process is of locating these families. I mean, this is an investigation that's never been done before in American history, because a policy like this has never existed in American history. So, and they're basically searching for a needle in a haystack. When this policy was implemented, it was done so rushed and so just frantically by the last administration, sources are telling me anyway, that now the Biden administration is having to go through and find records that don't necessarily exist. The Trump administration, when they separated these families, didn't keep records for all of the families. So families have since been moved back across the border, and we're talking about very rural areas, often very dangerous areas, very isolated areas. And you've got advocacy agencies along the border who are literally knocking on doors in places like rural Guatemala, trying to find some of these families. And it has just been an impossible thing. The administration says these 4 families are just the beginning. They expect to be able to reunite more. But you mentioned it, Terry. I mean, we're talking about 1,000+ kids. That was a big headline out of this phone call I was on yesterday. Most lawyers thought that there were 545 or so. The administration is now saying this number exceeds 1,000 kids that are still, to this day, years after this policy, are still not with their parents.
It's horrible to think about, Cecilia, and the numbers are daunting, and the task itself of now finding all these families, as you mentioned, is daunting. But what happens to these families after they are reunited?
This is a really complicated thing. A lot of the advocacy organizations are pushing for that the administration gives them basically compensation for what they've endured in the way of some kind of legal protection once they are allowed here in the country. Now, these 4 families are going to be offered a temporary type of protection. They call it humanitarian parole. They will be allowed to come here and stay legally without any fear of deportation. But advocates say these families have been through so much, literally have had their children in custody without them for years now, that the government owes them more than just some kind of temporary status. And the administration, sources are telling me, are looking into ways to try to offer them some kind of status. It's unclear exactly what that's going to look like at this point, though.
To make them whole after this ordeal. So the Biden administration, it faced a lot of criticism from both sides of the aisle on handling the southern border. He didn't even mention the border in his address to Congress and the people, a sure sign that he didn't want to talk about something that's a problem for him. What's the status of the situation at the border right now, and what's the administration going to do about it?
Yeah, we've been talking about it for so many weeks now because it really is hot down there. The numbers of migrants who were apprehended crossing the border reached a 20-year high. That's under the Biden administration. And they say, look, they have done a good job. This is them saying this of moving kids out of that first line of defense, that Customs and Border Patrol custody, these jail-like facilities that are not meant for kids, moving them into more child-friendly facilities through the Department of Health and Human Services. They've opened up shelters. They say children who on average were staying in these more adult facilities, these Border Patrol facilities, for an average of 5 days. That has been reduced down to 20 hours. They've made a reduction in the number of kids in Border Patrol custody, down by 84%. But Terry, you mentioned it. This is the political issue that continues to dog this president. Poll after poll has shown that he is underwater on this issue in terms of how voters feel that he is handling this issue at the border. They say he is not doing a very good job of it.
And by the looks of things, he's got his work cut out for him. Cecilia Vega at the White House. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.